Hey everyone, Danielle here with another video for you. And this week I'm going to be talking about coloring with colored pencils. I had a bunch of people ask, and so I thought I'd do just a little video. I don't use them that often, but I thought I could share what I do know with you. And first thing is, I really like these Prismacolor colored pencils. And just to be clear, colored pencils are different than watercolor pencils. We are not going to be using water with these pencils. It just won't work. So I do like these pencils. I picked up this set at Michael's with a 40% off coupon because they are a little bit expensive. And I got the set of 72 colors. They come in smaller and larger sets. 72 is kind of right in the middle, and I picked it because it had a pretty good assortment of colors for me to do some blending and shading. And it comes in this little tin, and they have these trays. And on the tops, this is how I organize mine into my purples and blues and greens and yellows and reds, and then my neutrals are on the bottom just because I really don't use them all that often. And like I said, the 72 set was good enough for me. If you wanted to do more blending and shading, you could obviously get a larger set. A few other things you might want to have are obviously a pencil sharpener because your pencils will get dull. And I just have a little manual one. If you do a lot of coloring, you might want to invest in an electric sharpener. It would probably make your life a lot easier. And I like to have a few erasers. This one is pretty much your standard eraser, what you would think of having on the end of your pencil. It's pretty firm, not very flexible. And then I also have a few of these little kneaded rubber erasers, which are really cool. They're kind of pliable. You can mold them and shape them however you want. And it's nice if you're working with a small space that you want to do some erasing in. You can shape it to a nice little point and really get into a tight spot. So I definitely recommend having those on hand. So those are the most basic supplies, and you could just do straight up coloring with your pencils with just those few items. But like other things, if you wanted to, get a little fancy with your colored pencils, you certainly can, and I'm going to show you how today. You just need a few extra supplies, and all these things are really inexpensive, and you can find them at your local craft stores. First up, you're going to need some sort of liquid to do the blending with, and I use baby oil. You can also use a product called odorless mineral spirits, and I think the brand name for that, like if you were to walk into Michael's, would be Gamsol. So you could use any of those three things: baby oil, odorless mineral spirits, or Gamsol. I use baby oil because I had read or heard somewhere that the mineral spirits were pretty harmful, if they were ingested or if a kid got its hands on them. And I have two small children, so I just like to be as safe as possible. And not that I want them drinking baby oil, that's just as dangerous, but if they were to get it on their, skin or hair, I wouldn't feel as bad. I'd feel a little safer knowing that at least it was a product intended for the use of children. So that's why I use baby oil. If you don't have kids or they're older, then feel free to use any of those three things. And then you're going to need some tools to actually do the blending after you color. And I have this little, container that I just keep all my stuff in. And the first thing I'm going to show you are something called blending stumps. And they're kind of like, it feels like condensed paper. Like, that's really the only way I can describe it. And they come in all different sizes, and this is a number 2. And the smaller the number, the smaller your blending stump is going to be. So you'll have a finer point. So that's a 2. This is a 5 or a 6, I can't remember, but you can see it's much larger. And I like to have a few different sizes on hand depending on the project I'm working on. So if I have a small space I'm trying to blend in, I can use a smaller one versus if I'm working with a larger surface area, I can use a larger stump. If you're going to use these blending stumps, you're going to want to have what's called a sandpaper block, and that's really what it is. It's a block with some sandpaper on it. And there's actually little sheets of sandpaper on here, stapled on here, so this one's dirty, so I can actually just peel this one off and throw it away. And there's a clean one underneath. And I'll go ahead and I'll show you how to use that after I do some coloring later on. Another little blending tool that I really like is Cut and Dry Nib by Ranger. And these are really, really tiny. They have a really fine point. These are more of kind of like a foamy, flexible material. And they're really tiny. And I just found out today that they do actually make a holder for these. You pop it in and it's like a pen. And so instead of trying to hold it with my fingers and color, I could pop it into the holder and use that. And that would be much easier than trying to hang on to this little nib and do coloring. It's actually kind of annoying to try to use this like that. So I actually have it in my cart over at Simon Says Stamp, and I can't wait to get it and use it with these. And Simon Says Stamp does actually carry most of these supplies in their store. They actually have a little starter kit for using colored pencils, and I'll link to that below. But all these things are relatively inexpensive, and you can find them at your local craft stores as well. Another thing is paper. You want to use a good quality cardstock, and so I'm going to use my Neenah Silver White. I know that it's not going to pill or anything when I'm coloring on it. And as far as ink, I use both the Memento Tuxedo Black and the VersaFine Onyx Black. I tested them both out with the oil to see if they would bleed or anything like that, and they didn't. So you can feel free to use either one. Obviously one's a dye ink and one's a pigment ink, but they both work equally as well. And I stamped this cute little paper lantern from Lawn Fawn's Lunar Lights, and I'm actually going to color them pretty much the same way. One of them though I'm going to use the baby oil on, and I just picked 3 different shades of purple, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to color the one on the left strictly with the colored pencils, no baby oil at all. And when I color, I really take a similar approach to how I color when I use my Copics, and that is I start with my lightest shade and I just do little circles or kind of gentle strokes back and forth across the image just to get a really nice even layer of color. And then I'll go in with a more mid-tone and add in shadows and highlights where I think they would be. And then lastly I'll go in with the darkest shade and do more add more shadows to get more highlights in different places. And I'll just keep going back over and over with all 3 shades, layering and building on the colors until I'm happy with what I have. And so that is that. It's pretty simple. It looks really nice, really pretty. You can get some really great shading and highlighting with the colored pencils just as they are. But you can see it's kind of grainy, and you can definitely tell I used a colored pencil. I'm going to use those same 3 pencils, and I'm going to color this other lantern, except this time after I color I'm going to add some baby oil into the mix to kind of switch it up. And you'll see how you get a totally different look when you use the baby oil. And when I color with these, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start with my lightest shade, except you'll notice that I'm not really going to be too concerned about getting a really even coloring. I'm actually going to be a little bit more heavy-handed and apply down more of the pigment from the pencil because I want to make sure that there's plenty on the paper to blend with down the road. And I'm going to be pretty general in applying the different colors. I'm just going to make sure I get them in the general area that I think that the shadows would be, because once I start using the baby oil, I'm going to be able to kind of manipulate the color and spread it around, just like you do when you blend and shade with your Copics. So it's pretty cool. So I'm just going to go in and keep kind of adding color, and I'm going to get my blending stumps out. And a tip would definitely be to just pour a little bit of that baby oil or whatever you're using into some smaller container. You really don't need a whole lot, and I do this so I don't run the risk of knocking over the whole container of baby oil on my desk, because that's something that I would definitely do. And I'll just dip my blending stump in. You don't need a whole lot on the end, and I'm going to just start blending the colors. And you want to start with the darkest shades and kind of pull in through the mid-tone and into the lighter shade, just like you would with your Copics. It's a very similar approach to coloring with colored pencils when you're doing this blending with the baby oil. And so I'm just going to keep working that with the same idea, starting on the outside with the darker shade and doing tiny circles and really trying to pull that color in and blend it from the outside. And the nice thing is that you can just keep working, and if you're curious to know about the baby oil, you'll actually be able to feel and see when you're blending that you need to add more to your stump. It'll just get kind of dry, and you'll notice that the colors aren't really moving the way that you want them to. And so I can go back in with my pencils, lay down a little bit more color just to get it the way that I really want it. One recommendation I would have would be you don't want to put down too much of the pigment from the colored pencils, because it doesn't absorb into the paper like a Copic marker. It's actually sitting on the surface, and you're kind of really pushing around the pigment with these blenders. And if you add too much on, you can actually you'll actually be able to see it. So you just use caution. You don't want to put too much down. So there you have it. The one on the left with my plain pencils, the one on the right was the pencils with the baby oil. And remember, I used the same colors and pretty much the same technique for both of them, but you get 2 totally different looks. And I think the one with the baby oil just looks really neat. It definitely has more of the look of a marker. It's very smooth. I feel like I can get better blending and shading with it. When you're done, you'll notice you obviously have some of the pigment left on your blending tools, and this is where, for your blending stumps, the sandpaper block is going to come in handy. You're just going to take it and sand it, and apply pretty good pressure. And I do it on an angle because you want to try and maintain the point so that you can go back and use it again. And for the little cut and dry nib, it's really easy. You just take your scissors and you can just trim off the ends. And I kind of trim them to try to keep a little point. And so you really get to reuse these supplies over and over again. And they're pretty cheap to start anyway, so they do last quite a long time, especially if you're like me and you don't really do that much coloring with them all that often. Now, the one on the right, sometimes I get a little heavy-handed with adding the shadows. And the nice thing about colored pencils is there is some room for error. You can always go in with an eraser and clean it up. Now, normally I would wait until this had, been pretty dry, but I'm just going to go in right now and very gently with my eraser, I'm going to try and take away some of the color from the middle where I think, if I were following the principles of lighting, where I think the light would be hitting my lantern, just to kind of brighten it up a little. And you just want to do it really gently, and you'll see it comes right off on the eraser. And that's about it. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you guys later.